sorry not to necessarily interrupt your conversations, but if we want to get started with kind of our topic of discussion, thank you so much thanks all of you for coming, and for those of you who I called and said, please come, because I wasn't sure if we'd have enough people and all that. Thank you for coming. This is just, a kind of casual discussion thinking about the differences between Oliver and White and John Deere being very close to each other, geographically and probably functioning in similar ways, but I think it'll be interesting to kind of talk about how the two factories work differently. So I have some pre-written questions, but first, if you worked at Oliver or White, would you like to raise your hand for me? All right, and if you worked at John Deere, would you like to raise your hand? Very cool. Well, thank you for coming. If anyone wants to share first, just like a 1 or 2 sentence description of what they did at their factory. Not everyone has to share, but if you want to, we can get started that way. Dwayne, maybe if you want to go first.
Sure, yeah. I worked at Oliver way back in the early 60s. I was a hand screw machinist. I don't remember much about it, but I was a farm kid, and going from a farm kid to, driving tractors and so forth to making parts. It was quite a change. Then at John Deere, I worked as a multiple screw machine operator, setup man, and then I went up into manufacturing engineering. But one of the things at John Deere, if you didn't have an engineering degree, you couldn't be called a manufacturer. You couldn't be called anything with an engineer, engineer is a primary title. I was an engineering analyst. Did a lot of that meant I didn't have a college degree or an engineering degree. But, a lot of things, the machining part was pretty similar, I think. Both places, I can speak more for the salary part probably, but I've got some things on the table over there that I kept, if you want to take a look at them. One of them in the little notebook there is my little machinist magic book, so to speak. You've got the official engineering sheet that shows you how you're supposed to do a job, but then you got the machinist. This is really, I'm here today. This is how you really need to do it. And I look back at it now, and I can't make a lot of sense at it, but when I was a machinist, it made sense, and the things he really had to take note of, that I'd make a note of, because you just learn. It's tricks of the trade, so to speak. And then there's some other things there. Cost reduction was always a big thing at John Deere. And I've got a couple things memo sheets and so forth that I would have wrote to some of the supervisors. I was always one of the guys that rocked the boat just a little bit. I didn't have a college degree, so I didn't have to worry about going to be the next president of the company or anything like that. I was just one of the guys. I wasn't an empire builder, and I think I shared with someone that one of the things we always noticed in the salary side of it at John Deere was that people were always looking to, how do I get the next promotion? What do I need to do to make myself and my department look good? And one report that I wrote about one of my cost reduction projects, I think I wrote it 3 times to a guy with his MBA that came in from the outside. And the 3rd time I rewrote it, I didn't even really know what it said anymore, let alone anybody else. But my boss always wanted to make his department look good and make himself look good so he could get the next promotion. So that was one of the things. I wasn't worried about it. I was worried about doing my job and doing it right and doing it on time. Time was always a big thing at John Deere. If you've got something to do, you better get it done when it's supposed to get done, or you're going to have to answer to somebody. If you need to work overtime or under time or in between time, you better do it. So, but it was a good time. Both places were good places to work, I'll say. If you got any questions, just feel free to ask, because I don't have all the answers, but I could probably make one up if I don't. Yeah, the salary world, you learn that. One time I said something that was really stupid in a meeting. I was charged at a meeting, and I had a lot of bosses there. I was probably the lowest ranking guy, but I was trying to explain something. And I said something, you know, at the time I thought it was pretty smart, you know, and one of my bosses asked a question, the big boss. And boy, when he asked the question, I saw that, boy, did I screw up, you know, I really said something wrong. I didn't know what to do, but luckily one of my coworkers came in and bridged the gap, so to speak. But boy, was I feeling like I wanted to crawl in a hole because I really screwed up. Not that any of you have done that, but I made a few mistakes. You just try to not make the same mistake at the same level, you know, twice in a row. But mistakes are okay if they're for the right reason, but you don't want to do them over and over again.
Someone from White Farm or Oliver want to share what they did while they were there? Dave, you want to?
Yeah, my name is Dave Kitcher. I started working at the Oliver Engineering Department right after I got out of the Air Force. And so we were in Charles City 5 years. And then some idiot up in Hopkins, Minnesota made a decision they ought to move engineering up there. So, and then we combined it with Minneapolis-Moline Engineering. So we were up there about 5 years. And so I was just about ready to buy a house. I put some money down on a house up there, and then they decided we ought to be out in Libertyville, Illinois. So we were out there for almost 9 years, and then my wife Rita and myself, we moved back to Charles City. And then that lasted a year. They closed up in 80, I think it was 84 again. I went to Florida, worked for Pratt & Whitney Aircraft for a while. We had kids in school, so we had a chance to come back to Charles City when Allied Products bought it out. So we came back, and so I was here till the end. And then I got on with ACO Corporation, a spinoff of Ellis Chalmers, so I worked with them for the last 14 years. Came back to Iowa.
Cool.
Dick Neal. I started at Oliver like 6 weeks after I was 18, so, you know, one job, you only had to work 40 hours a week and sit on the farm for however many, you know, so you had time to farm after you worked there 40 hours, so. I started in the repair parts department, then down the assembly line and correction, but never worked on a machine or anything like that, so. Built the tractor, so various jobs, so.
Maybe another person from Deere would like to share what they did.
Did you work in
Here, you go ahead.
I'm Dick Michael. I joined John Deere in 1957 as a co-op student. Of course, at that time, Deere was still making two-cylinder tractors, and I really didn't know too much about the planning and preparations that were going on for the new generation of tractors introduced in 1961 when they brought out the 4 and 6-cylinder tractors. But after graduation, I continued with Deere and worked on many size projects, worked in the engine group a little bit, worked on the 80-10. Anybody can remember the 80-10. And then I moved out to product engineering, and then I worked on the new generation of tractors for John Deere, the 1020 and 2020 tractors, and 23, I think it was 2310. Then I worked on various activities after that, worked a lot on the power shift transmission. And then in 1972, Deere brought out the sound guard body. And long range transmission. And in 1982, I worked on 15-speed power shift transmission. And from the drive. And started working, I worked then on the new generation tractors brought out in 1992. And then I retired in 1993.
Well, if nobody else wants to share their kind of origin or their timeline with their company, I have kind of our next question for everyone. While you worked at, or unless you wanted to, do you want to share real quick? I know you have. Okay. I was wondering, for those of you, who worked at White, Oliver, and then John Deere, how aware were you of the other company? We're close to each other. John Deere's in Waterloo, we're up here in Charles City. Was that something that you talked about while at your job? Was kind of the differences, or not the differences, but I guess kind of the competition between the two product lines?
No, John Deere's machinist, so we never talked about White. Anywhere that I was, or I was a union member and so forth when I was in the shop. But even up in engineering, other than we had a couple people from White that came down and got jobs in manufacturing engineering. And then they might say a few things about it, but not very much. Other than that, we never really discussed that. We were just concerned with
Getting our own job done.
yes, that's exactly what it was, getting your own job done.
Dean, tell us about what you did at Oliver, your job history.
Well, and I had a unique opportunity. I worked at both companies. I was, remember Dave when he asked us all to move to Libertyville?
Yeah.
And I turned that down. I was in technical service at the time. And I didn't, for various reasons, I just didn't think I should move to Libertyville, Chicago area, kind of far away, I guess. And I had headhunters found out that I was available, and they contacted me and set up an interview, and I worked in there. At that time, before the Northeast site was done at Deere's, they had the Arlen's department store down there on University Avenue. They leased that. And technical service was in there, and service training, and publications, various other departments. And I was asked, they interviewed me, and we'll offer you the position. And my first job was putting on service training schools for the German-built tractors, the ones that were built in Mannheim, Germany. We were kind of shipped all over, putting on their various schools. The 2840. I don't know if you remember that model, and the 2640, and put on schools on that. We did that for a little bit. Then they had a special field program that was very hush-hush. It was under the radar totally. It was on the 86 and 8430 John Deere, the articulated tractor they'd come out with. And it was an engineering disaster. They'd had all kinds of problems with it. Drivetrain problems, cab problems, engine problems. They brought in about 50 of those tractors. I, myself, and an engineer out of the PEC, they brought them in. We leased a building downtown Waterloo. They brought in these tractors, and we had about 20 mechanics down there. They tore them tractors right down to the bare bones. And they'd range anything from 1,500 hours to 5,000 hours. And I took pictures and write-ups and everything on what had to be done, and then they had the engineering department come in and, okay, this is how we're gonna change this, this is how we're gonna change that. And my job was to write this book. It was basically to go out to the dealers on what the field program was gonna be. And it was a very unique experience. So I wasn't in manufacturing ever, but I got the real feeling, and it's just my own personal feeling. I'm a small town guy, maybe, that John Deere, they're just looking for a warm body they can pour green blood into. And we're gonna make you love John Deere, you know, and just there's no disrespect to John Deere. They're a beautiful company, they're very successful, obviously. And but they're huge. And so your impact on what you felt was the final product or the final impact to the dealers was very minimal as an individual. And that's, you know, but that's just big corporate America is what it is. And then I had, after about a year and a half, Libertyville was still in operation, but they moved, the service department stayed in Charles City. Remember that day, you know, technical service? And the head of tractor technical service, his name was Irv Ockelberg. He was a Minneapolis molding guy. He worked for Max Hanley, who was the head of all technical service for White Farm North America. They called me up one day and said, "Hey, Dee, we'd like to talk to you." And they had an opportunity for me they wanted me to be in technical service as a tech service rep. And basically, our job was to field problems in the field that they were having, figure out what the problem is. Is it an engineering problem or is it a quality problem? It involved a lot of travel. I'd be out to dealerships, you know, I remember one particular example. I don't want to dominate this crowd, but the two 135s had just really come out in production. And remember, Dave, we had that final drive planet carrier shot peening problem where they would crack in the final drives of the tractor. And it was an overlook on manufacturing. I don't know what it was. But this planet carrier, which was about that big around, would crack after a little bit of time. Some of them would, some of them wouldn't. And a piece of that would go down into the drivetrain. Well, I'll never forget, it was in Pigeon, Michigan. And a dealer had just gotten in a nice 135 4th of July parade and driving it down the street, waving at everybody. And the dealer said the tractor shuddered a little bit and jerked and almost kerbang, and 50-gallon of hydraulic oil drops out on Main Street, and they couldn't move the tractor. They locked up right there. Oh my God, I was in the office. Max Motion McGee, gotta get in the office here. Doug Williams was on the phone. He was head of all White Farm Equipment Service. He was based out of Oak Brook, Illinois. He says, "We need somebody in a plane right now to Pigeon, Michigan. We're following him with a truck with a whole new final drive off the assembly drive line. We gotta go up there and stomp that fire out right now. This guy is ballistic." And I understand, you know. He said, here I come in, long-haired kid, you know, college kid. And "Hi, I'm Dean Jaden here. I'm here to help you out." And oh man, they're loaded on me, you know. But we did after I was there over a week.
That's when you had more hair than you got?
Yeah, right. That's why I don't have hair now. But anyway, we was there over a week and listening to him vent on me about every morning. But we replaced that whole final drive that had to lift the cab off, break the tractor right in between the front frame and the rear frame, and start all over. But it was more of I was there with a field service rep, a dealer mechanic, and of course the dealer gnawed at me all the time. But we were able to kind of appease the waters there a little bit. Out on Main Street with floor dry, mopping up Main Street.
That's a lot of oil cleaning.
Oh yeah, with that final drive on those tractors and similar to Deere's, is a common sump. The hydraulic system, the final drive system is all one capacity of oil. I think it's about, what is it, Dave, 34 gallon?
Probably close to that.
You know,
Yeah.
but it all went out right in a pile the size of that table, you know. know,
And I'm sure
maybe-
that never happened to John Deere.
Well, I don't know. According to the dealer, he said he'd never be able to sell a white tractor. I don't know. But I'll never forget that. It was Pigeon, Michigan. But
That
that,
match out there, I'd take care of it.
yeah. The only reason we could drag it off the street because enough oil on the street. But, and I'm kind of diverting off the subject here, you know. To answer your question, White Farm, you know, they were teeny tiny compared to Deere's. But he as an individual felt I was really having an effect on things, you know, I had an input, the engineering department would listen to the service department.
Yeah.
When I was at Deere's and that, I was told more often than that, that's not your responsibility, you just worry about writing this book. You know, you're departmentalized. But obviously, in big companies, that's how things are
Well,
successful.
usually what you have to say now is your responsibility affects my responsibility, so that's why I'm talking with you right now. That's what I use every day almost.
Oh, okay.
You know, the
Interesting.
fishing with dynamite type thing. You know?
So, answer to your question originally is that in engineering, we didn't worry too much about Oliver and White.
Well, obviously not, because Oliver, you know, when Minneapolis, and I again don't want to dominate the conversation, but when Oliver and White were combined, Minneapolis Moline, I think Dave had about 4% of the market share, didn't we?
Yeah, pretty close.
And Oliver was about 10.
Yep.
And they thought, okay, we'll throw them together, paint the tractor silver. Everybody was mad at everybody. And think White Motors thinking at the corporate level is we'll combine these and we'll get 15%, maybe even with synergy, we might even reach close to 18, 20%. Where John Deere, you were a third of the market, at least.
At least.
And, you know, you were pounding on International Harvester all the time, and so we were just a blip on the radar for John Deere, you know,
Right.
but in our own little family, we thought we were pretty big time, didn't we? You know, it's all,
We had a lot of good people out there.
we did, dedicated people, you know.
Ford, when they came out with their power shift in the late 1950s, got Deere's attention, and so
Yeah.
Deere came out with the power shift.
They actually hired the Ford engineer from Ford, because he was fired because that selective speed was such a disaster. And the engineering department for Ford said, you can't go into production yet, this thing's not ready. But you know, that's how it is with private John Deere with the 86, 84, 30 John Deere tractors. That's how it was at White Farm, Dave, you know that. Marketing would be constantly pounding on you, we gotta get this into production. And it wasn't fully tested. Well, that Ford engineer had to fall on the sword, you know, the selective speed's a disaster, and John Deere hired him. You know.
Well, as engineers, of course, we like to make everything perfect.
Sure you do, yeah,
So,
at all costs.
No, I like to say that Ford wouldn't have gone in production with the Model D, he waited for the Ford Taurus.
Yeah.
But of course, that can't happen. You gotta draw the line and make a decision,
Yeah, we're
Well,
done
production.
with
and whether you're
test.
through with it or not.
Yeah, you're gonna go into production. Isn't that right?
Oh, yeah, that's exactly right. That's no joke. I was gonna go back to what you were saying when White smashed Oliver and Moline together. This is from '72 that got sent out to dealers. It's Dealer Advisory Council. It says recommendation of the name White Oliver MM or White Oliver Moline. It says this is under study. Majority of the dealers prefer the color of the tractor and equipment to be green. The minority of the dealers prefer neutral color, other than green or yellow. Possibly someone may submit a better plan. That was in May of 1972 that it came out. And I think they would have really had something if they went with the green and Oliver MM or Oliver white. But, you know,
I think that's what happened, they dumped the yellow and green paint together and red top shut, and come out silver.
Is the Nebraska tractor test, is that still functioning?
Yeah, still going.
Lynn and I was there, was that last summer? We stopped there? What, when we toured the museum, was that 5? Time flies. But yeah, it's still in operation. It really kind of made me, they have a museum there, and again, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but all the test equipment that we used on the test track, which a lot of that was donated by Oliver, is now in the museum. So, I'm kind of an antique, which I probably am.
But didn't you host tractors or take tractors out there when that part of your job?
Yeah, one of my positions I had when I was in product test was, yeah, the last, basically the last tractors that were built in Charles City, the 100 series. Ivan Anderson was my boss. He was head of test and development, but he was a unique guy. He said, Dean, you're the test engineer, you're in charge. I'm just gonna sit back behind the scenes, you know, and so, but yeah, we took what we called the 100 series, which was the Cummins powered tractors out there, the 185, 160, 140, 120, 100. And then also took the Deutz tractors when we were with an agreement with Deutz to build their tractors for them, Deutz Alice.
You guys may not remember me, but I was one of the first women to work in the foundry at White Farm at Oliver. And when we first went down there, I mean, I was the first woman, and my friend was, my girlfriend was the second one, and we didn't have a shower or anything. So we had to go into the office where they had a private bathroom. We'd stand on each side so that we could at least wash up. And you all probably know how dirty you got in the foundry, so.
So what did you do?
I did a lot of things. I was on core takeoff the most. And my friend who has passed away, Joyce Webb, she was on what they called the hot box. And she worked on making cores coming through this machine. And I was on one that, where for core takeoff, I would take those axles off. And they weighed about 100 pounds. Well, I only weighed about 120. But I loved my work, and I was so sad when it closed, you know. But I could be on the paint line. I could be on chipping and grinding, which I was for a while. Cliff Flockey was my supervisor. I was on the sand mixing line for a little bit. Oh yeah, I was all over.
So when you ended your career there, how many women were there like you?
There was a total of, I believe, 5 girls, and you're gonna laugh at this. 3 of us were named Shirley. And one of them did go down to John Deere to work after, you know, when we got close. And I can't remember what the other 2 girls' names were because, well, my name is Shirley, so I didn't have to.
So you went to Deere?
No, the other Shirley, her name was Shirley King, went to John Deere in Waterloo. And she worked there for a while. I don't know.
In the foundry?
I can't tell you where she's at, or where she worked, but I know she worked down there. She might have worked on the line. I also worked on the line in number 1 at one time, for a very short period. So.
But you like the foundry the best?
Oh, I love the foundry. I'd go back there in a minute. And I love my shift, you know.
Donnie, you can speak to that. When we worked in M&R, the foundry and the factory were totally divorced. But they didn't share much, but they were the foundry people, my observation was very dedicated. I mean, they were loyal.
Yes.
Did you see that?
Yeah. Like I said, I never had a whole lot to do with the foundry,
But I had a car accident, and I wound up in Rochester while I was working at White Farm. And they took an x-ray of my lungs, and they said, do you smoke? I says, no. Well, it looked like I smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day.
Oh, I'm sure.
That's how bad it was. Well, and that was way back before offshore, any of that stuff come in.
You're amazing to be here today.
Yeah, I'm still walking.
You don't know half the story. Her blood pressure this morning was like 290 over 95, and she shouldn't be here, but
I wasn't gonna miss it.
But you came, that's great.
So if I wind up in the hospital, you can all come and visit me. And we'll talk about tractors.
I used to be a parts man for Oliver for Jack Thill in Rose Creek, Minnesota.
Oh, really?
Just for a real short period of time. I learned a lot about the 1800 A series. Real quick.
When I called on that, I would go up there once in a while. You sold a tremendous amount of 4-150s. I bet if you sold one, you've sold 50 of them up there, didn't you? But there was a Pitson that was
Jim Pitson
was the parts man at that time, or shop manager.
Go ahead.
Well, they have a Root River has a little show over there by Racine. And anyway, I happened to be over there when Oliver was featured tractor, and there's a lot of people around Rose Creek that collect Olivers. In fact, a friend of mine's got the very first Oliver that Jack Thill ever sold. But anyway, I was walking back to my car, and Jack, who was my boss for a short time when I was his parts man, and I stumbled across him, and we were walking back, and this has been not that long ago, and Jack had tears coming out of his eyes. He said, "Jim, I sold most of these Olivers sitting out here." Yeah, he was pretty emotional about it.
That was a showplace dealership. That was a beautiful dealership.
Yep.
I do have to add one thing. If I didn't know you guys were here today until my daughter called me and she says, "Are you going to Charles City for the Oliver thing?" I said, "Well, I didn't know anything about it." So it didn't come on my Facebook until this morning. So I would like any more meetings or anything, I'd like to be included. In fact, there's a Oliver thing up by Racine group that gets together.
Yep, the Northern Lights.
Great Northern,
I can't,
yeah, Great Northern Oliver Collectors.
yeah. My friend, Ray Koenigs belongs to it too, so. But I would go back to work for Oliver any day, even at my age.
She's just a kid yet.
How many of you guys are engineers? Trained engineers? Only one here?
Dave, weren't you? You were a product engineer, weren't you?
Yeah, I did a little bit of everything, but,
Did you,
one thing that,
Did you have an engineering degree?
one thing I got to remember, we'd send our tractors out to Nebraska, and to get certified out there, they come out with a pamphlet every year, and it had all the different manufacturers and all the test results as far as lift capacity and all this kind of stuff. Well, they sent Dean Barker's boy out there one year, George.
Yeah.
And they always run the tractors on the track out there to kind of break them in. Well, George ran that tractor 14 hours straight without taking a break to go to the bathroom or anything. The professor that ran that place out there, he had his guys make up a trophy. And they gave it to
That'd be George. Dr. Leviticus was the name of that guy, and that's an interesting story
Yeah.
too. He was in World War II. He's Jewish, and when he was about 5 or 6 years old, his mother kicked him out the back door. The Nazis were coming in the front door, and that's the last time he ever saw his family. He made it to. He said he told. It's an interesting story. He lived on eggs, stolen eggs and milk for quite a while. Made it to Amsterdam, and then got to the United States.
Does anybody remember when the train went off the tracks by the foundry?
No.
Oh, yeah, that happened too. I
What
can't
year- what
remember
year
too
was
much
that?
about it, huh?
What year was that, do you remember?
Gosh, I can't tell you, but I remember that the train went off the tracks, and of course, all of us nosy people were watching. Yeah.
That was the train they pushed up front to the charging floor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
Pete Fuller probably would remember if he was.
Didn't hit derail, did it?
Yeah, it derailed.
No, it didn't hit derail.
No.
The
Oh.
rescue.
Sorry, I wanted to hear it after working
That
on
was
their
later.
deal.
Didn't take the derail down,
That's another derailment.
And then there was one Christmas time, we got paid extra, because it was right at Christmas time, and I was going out in the field and getting all these tractors that didn't run off the line, you know? You remember that then too. Cold, oh man.
Cold and drag them in.
Yeah.
you know,
And then we'd sometimes use something like ether to spray the
Starting
road,
with the,
try and get them back in. See, I did work then.
A lot of ether.
yeah. Did you drag them into the, what they call the bullpen?
The bullpen, yeah.
That's where I worked some, so.
I don't know why they didn't work when they took them off the line in the first place,
They
but
weren't
they.
done, they weren't finished,
Yeah,
so they wait for parts, and
Yeah.
then we'd swap parts, and when they built so many of them, they'd bring in 2 tractors, and I remember one, we took the parts off this tractor and put on this one more on that one. I said, why don't we just change the serial number? That'd been too easy. But they sold what he wanted, the hydroelectric, and this one didn't, so there they were, we just swapped everything.
I did work on the line a little bit too. That was when, you know, the plant was down and up and down. And what I had heard and what I had found, that when John Deere was down, White Farm was going really good. And then when White Farm was down, then John Deere would go really good. And that happened a lot. So that's when some of us got laid off and everything too, you know, depending where the work was at.
Well, I remember one thing when White Motor bought Oliver Corporation, everybody was pretty excited about that.
Mhm.
But then in the long run, when the tractor plant would have a good profit year, milk some of that profit out, put in their truck.
Yeah, go to
Oh, yeah.
Ogden, Utah.
And they didn't know what they were doing then either.
Right.
They built a new foundry up in, someplace up out in Canton, Ohio, I think it was.
I think you're right.
And, it never opened.
They did.
And they had a group of computer people working in there, but it never went into production. And then they built a new truck assembly plant out in West Virginia, I think it was. That never opened.
Oh, it did.
There was a few $1 million that just got thrown away that could have been gone into our development.
Yep.
You know, for like a full power shift or something like that, so,
That, place out in Canton got sold to Massey,
yeah.
and then got sold to, I think, Hoover Vacuum Cleaner, cause that was supposed to be the engine plant.
Oh, the
That was
Canton
supposed to
engine
be,
plant?
yeah, that was supposed to be the corporate engine deal.
So that's a Hoover vacuum cleaner?
Well, no, it's somebody else now. Yeah, I mean, it just, you know, I think they just got the sign hanging on a hook because it's gonna change something.
Now, when you read the history of tractors, it's all changes and buyouts, and
Well, yeah.
for most of them, Deere is the only one.
When I worked for ACO, when I first got involved in them, they wanted to resurrect this, old 6-speed power shift that they had up there at Alice Chalmers. And anyway, so I got worked on that project for a while, and then, they decided to go with a full power shift if they could find one that they could just buy. Well, I ended up buying the power shift from John Deere. It was made down, it was called Funk Transmission Division. It was down in, I think, Coffeyville.
Coffeyville, Kansas.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we were still building the final drives, but we had to recost it with all the gears out of it. So. that
Yeah, it was
quite
just a
project,
hollow
too.
box.
Yeah. And so then, that was working out pretty good. They were building those final drives in Charles City. And then what happened at, the top officials decided they were gonna increase the price of that to ACO by 20%. And ACO said, no way. So they found somebody else to make that, transmission, and it was over in England. They probably spent more money building that thing over there than what they would have paying that 20% increase, but that's the way the ACO people were.
That's when Allied Products owned the Charles City plant, you
Yeah,
know.
yep.
And
And
that's
then, ACO had bought out,
White
Coldwater.
Farm. Or yeah,
They
cold
know
water,
that,
yeah.
They didn't wanna buy Charles City.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of discussion over that, why they didn't want our plant, but you could kinda see why. The facility was
Oh, yeah.
not very efficient to run.
Well, Donnie, remember, you know, when he worked in, remember what it'd be like in the winter in that plant? I mean, you know. Cold, well, and the the heating system of that was originally designed when Hart Parnell was, that we were the cooling tower for the gas plant. They'd send low pressure steam
Yep.
over to the plant to condense back into water, then it'd ship that back. So basically the heating
Yeah.
was free almost from Iowa Public Service. And then when that closed down, then we had to put in the boilers in the basement there, you know, in three huge, I don't know how many million BTU boilers there were.
Never got involved in that.
But, well, but then we still had that old infrastructure, that whole plant. So remember how in the winter, we maintained steam pressure around 3 or 4 pounds throughout the plant. You know, that's how we regulated the temperature. If the boilers got ahead, like you'd have a warm day and oh man, the steam pressure would start going up. Remember it'd be steam bubbling up in the floor in places, don't you remember that? Oh, everybody get excited, we'd have to idle them boilers down because everything was leaking around there. The last new building that was built in Charles City was for the 4150 line. That was in 1973.
About the time they finished the foundry, wasn't it?
Yeah,
At
right.
that time, yeah.
For those of you guys who worked at Deere, did you have any similar experiences dealing with all the quirks of your facilities or anything like that?
What was your question again?
They're kind of describing different quirks with the facilities that they had at their factory. Did Deere have anything like that in Waterloo? Or were you guys just running good the whole time?
The problem is threw a lot of money at.
I started at Deere and Foundry back in '72, and I was just getting in on the tail end of the old foundry, the new foundry, electric foundry they called it back then, the new foundry, was just cranking up in '72. And so the day I got hired, it was actually, that was when, late '72, September, when hiring was going on rapidly. I mean, I went over the day and it was 110 or 115 people in line that day, and I was one of the last ones in line when I got there that day. Wow. What a day to come over and get hired, you know? Well, they escorted us all into a room, and everyone got hired that day. Everybody but 2 people went to the old foundry or the mill room. 2 people, one of them I knew from Owine, his dad was a general supervisor, went to the new foundry. Imagine that. You know? But that's what it was. I mean, there were a lot of hiring going on. I worked in the foundry for 14 months, bid on everything. I wanted out of the foundry. I finally got a job up in the shops. I didn't know a mill from a radio drill. I mean, I just wanted to get out of the foundry. And I had a pretty good job. I worked in the core room as well, oil sand cores. You know, old machine, a World War II machine, oil sand blower, fill up these cores, boxes, and flip-flop jobs, they called them. Put it on the line, run through. And as it was a pretty good job, really, because I could have went to the mill room. A buddy of mine went to the mill room, was chipping and grinding, and he could only take that for about, he hung in there for about 4 months, but that was a horrible job. His hands, he'd come home, they were numb. After 3-4 months of this, he just, I've had enough, I can't handle it, he quit. So I was lucky in that respect. I didn't have to go to one of the lines and weren't running a unit. And so I felt pretty good in that respect, but I just didn't, I wanted to get out of the core room, so I was bidding and everything, and finally got up in the shops.
Was that Oliver or John Deere?
That was at John Deere.
Oh, okay.
So when you went downtown to the,
Yeah.
where the museum is now?
Mm-hmm. I worked in the old building, E-building, one of the 6-story buildings there.
And you run a radio drill?
I started out, I ran a radio drill, and I went up in the shops, and then I run a mill with that radio drill, and actually we were building the new parts for the hydrostatic front wheel drive. It was becoming they didn't have the mechanical front wheel hadn't come on the scene, it was all that hydrostatic. And basically our department machined all the parts, the yoke that went in, the assembly, the housing, the machine, the housing for the motor. And it was kind of interesting. It was, and finally there was some, I did that for about a year, and then there was a chance where they could slip me, it was kind of under the table thing, because they were protecting a guy on first shift. I could get in the assembly room to build them, put them together. Great job. And I got it, but I had that for about a year and a half, and then they were having issues with hydrostatic front wheel drive. They could run them. It was an amazing amount of power. The guys I talked to that worked out the PDC said that tested them and said it was amazing. I mean, they could actually, they just beat the heck out of them and they'd go. The problem is, they never did come up with a braking assembly for them. They were sending these to Mannheim, Germany as well. A lot of these units were going over there, and the farmers over there, well, over there, they drove their tractors like cars.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah, there would be no, yeah, it was rear wheel braking is all, the front wheel.
yeah, it was all in the front wheel, and they didn't have the technology wasn't there, and a lot of people were getting killed on them, and there's lawsuits occurring. So that's when the mechanical front wheel drive started. And once that came on the scene, the hydrostatic went away. But it was pretty interesting. It was a little, this housing was a little, the Cessna Motor Company made the little motor that went inside there. It was only about, probably a 4-inch diameter, about like that, but it was just amazing power they get from them. It was quite a unit back in the day, but like I say, when the mechanical came on the scene, then that all went away. And so that job back there went away, so I did another job. And I basically run several different machines over the years, but then I was part of that changing technology was occurring as far as standalone machines. The cell concept came to be.
Mm-hmm.
And when I always kind of, it's good, I ran a pair of CNC machines, and then they added a mill to that. And I ran that for a couple of years, and then pretty soon machine centers came on the scene. Well, the machine centers were the technology that they were looking for, because that eliminated your single machines, your boring machines, your mills, your drills, your grinders. All could be done. All that could be done in the CNC lathes and the machine center. And by the time I retired, and I've been retired almost 20 years now, but the big thing I could see was changing, not only, I mean, when they added the machine center, then they added a wash machine, so I did this whole cycle, we all did. That's what so all these standalone machines went away, and it was just cells and needed less people, and they did. That's when the downsizing of John Deere occurred, really. It was in the late 80s, early 90s is when things really, they didn't need a number of people. They could all, it's machine center and CNCs eliminated many jobs.
And they kept you busy on
Oh,
inside.
they did, yeah, it was.
When that machine was cycling, they had you.
Yeah, those days of standing there and waiting 10 minutes for a part to get done, that went away.
That was done.
It was just a, yeah. And I could see the writing on the wall. I was, parts I ran, well, Deere's had a statement as well back in I want to say probably 99, 98, 99, that any part over 50 pounds or under 50 pounds would be outsourced. Like GMT and Waverly was a big one. Most of my parts went there. There was other jobbers, small jobber shops were taken, because they could make more money outsourcing them, but the Deere realized their big parts, their housings, their transmissions and block housings are all done in these big belt machine centers that went through, and they could, and the tolerances were very tight on them as well. But Deere's could make money on those. Nobody else could run them to the tolerances they needed, unlike the small parts. But I could see the changes coming. I was gonna lose my job, and I'd have to bump throughout the unit. I had 31 years and 32 years in there, so with the encouragement of my wife, I retired.
If he got hearing aids.
If I got hearing aids.
So did you make it through the 80s all right? 'Cause
I
know
got
a lot
laid
of
off
guys-
one time, and
Yeah.
in fact, that was kind of an interesting story as well. Layoffs were occurring rapidly then. Things were really ramping up, but they were down. I mean, sales were down similar to what they are now. Things were really downhill. Farming crisis in the mid-80s. And I was scheduled to be laid off, but at that time, they bring in somebody up that was taking my position. I'd break him in for 2 or 3 weeks, and about the time he was ready to cut him loose, he got bumped. Somebody bumped him, and this went on for about 4 months.
You was
Finally,
training.
I was training, this 4-month period, I was training people. It was just a constant rollover of people coming in that were being bumped. And, finally my supervisor, which is a really great guy, he come up to me the last day before Christmas shut down in 1985, and he said, he's shaking his head, and he said, Mike, he said, he said, I knew what he was gonna say. He said, I gotta cut you loose. The union's on me, the company's on me to cut you loose, because you've been here for, I said, I understand. I appreciated being there another 4 months. So I was laid off from 85, December of 85, until I got called back in May of 87. So I was off 17 months. Just one time, that was the only time I was laid off.
Yeah, because the only reason why I asked, I had a guy that was in my department when I was in mid-frame service down there in Northeast side. He was off 4 years and came back.
Yeah. I was pretty lucky, the same supervisor I had was able to see I was scheduled to come back into the new foundry, because I had foundry experience. But my supervisor pulled some strings and got me back up in the same department, so I was able to. And fortunately, I got called back at a time where I knew the steward quite well, and he told me, Mike, he said, if you can get, he knew the ins and outs, he said, if I could get the hours in the remainder of that year from September through December, then I wouldn't lose that year of seniority that I had lost when I was laid off. And I did, I worked enough hours through overtime, these things are ramping back up again, so I didn't lose any seniority, so it went on. I was lucky in that respect. And there were people I knew, friends of mine and other employees, who got called back, but did lose some years of seniority.
Yeah.
So all them machine operations that were downtown, there's nothing down there anymore, is there?
No. I mean,
That all moved,
there is.
either that moved to the northeast side, or, you
I
know.
shouldn't say none of that, a lot, there's what they call a Z building, H building,
That's all your drivetrain down there.
drivetrain stuff is down there, that's still produced down there.
And then SPO, your service parts,
Mhm.
is down there as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
But all the high-rise buildings have been either
Tore down.
tore down or sold to other activities. One is a hotel.
Hotel.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's the one you see by the museum.
Mhm.
It's-
Well, that's east of that a little bit,
Yeah, right.
on the other end.
Yeah.
And then in between, there's a Tech Works.
That's Hawkeye Community College.
What?
That's Hawkeye Community College.
No,
That's-
it's,
Forever too.
They got all like machine training, machine tool, robotics
Yeah.
training in
But
there.
that's not Hawkeye, I don't think. I
Yeah,
think it's a Tech Work.
well, it's a joint venture, Hawkeye
Is it?
and
Yeah.
whoever down
Okay.
there, so.
I don't know.
When I
So
worked
either that work was farmed out to small mom and pop machine shops?
Anything under 50 pounds, that was a mission statement that Deere came out with at the time, saying anything under 50 pounds, we will not produce in plant. It's all going away. And it did. Eventually, it took several years to do that, but it did go away. Like I say, I think the majority of my parts, I were well under 50 pounds, but they all went to GMT and Waverly.
And so there are a lot of machine shops in Waterloo. You can get anything you need done there.
Well, we've got GMT right outside of town here.
Yeah.
Or Machine Tool Engineering, not GMT.
Yeah, that.
They do a lot of did a lot of
Yeah,
contracting.
there was a outfit, that was over by New Hampton too, that had.
Yeah, south of New Hampton.
South of New Hampton there.
Oh, yeah, Belltown there.
Yeah.
That was, and other than that, the thing I really noticed, I guess the thing I noticed most is, before I retired at Deere and Company, was things were changing as far as the cells but the tooling, the advancement of tooling, and how, and being a production worker and we were able, at that time, a lot of us operators, I learned on the run. I didn't go to school for it. I kinda got some help there and learned on the run, the CNC part of it. And that's what it was. The CNC became more developed too. At first it was just CNC, it was numerical control, and it was computerized numerical control where you make the programs. You may not necessarily make the programs, but you knew how the program worked, and you could go in and do what you wanted with it at times to tweak it to your benefit. But you learned there was only, tools can only be run at certain feeds and speeds. Well, when this new technology come out with titanium tip tools and stuff like that, boy, did things change dramatically. I had a gentleman come in when I was at this machine center that I ran at the time, and it was part of that, I forget what the assembly was now, but it was a long tube thing we had to drill through, and you had to maintain a plus or minus 2 thousandths from front to back, 16 inches, 2 thousandths was the tolerance on that. They had a heck of a time with that. And finally they got it to where it was going pretty good. Well, then they decided to get this new tooling. It was titanium tip. It was and the guy came in from the factory and he told me to punch that in. I looked at him and said, "There's no way. I'm not gonna put that in there." I said, "I'm not gonna sit there and watch that blow up." He said, "Well, you know, I will." I said, "Have at it." He did. I sat there and I watched the whole thing, and it was just I sat there and my mouth dropped open and man, are we screwed. That tree's good. I said to myself, they could do this and run and hold that tower. And it was all fed by coolant and wonderful job, did a great job. But that's what the tooling is doing. It's very expensive tooling. You want to be careful with it, but that's where it was going.
You have a restroom nearby.
That old radio drill I ran up here at Oliver, it was old. I mean, it's been there forever.
Yeah.
And so the first night I worked there was a guy showing me how to run it. And I said, "Well, how do you
It's
set
just
the
right
depths,
downstairs from
you know,
the
for the
top.
drills and the caps and everything,
Mhm.
you know, how deep you go?" He said, "Well, you get a bottle of red fingernail polish." So every night I went in and I checked my drills and my taps and everything, and I'd mark them.
Yeah.
Wanted to drill 1/2 inch deep, I marked them 1/2 inch, and that's how we did it.
There was an old gentleman when I worked there that couldn't read or write. He was operating, but he learned how to mark his scale on his radio drill,
Yeah.
where these parts, so when he set it up, he
When you
could
bring it down and you do
run
what
into
it's
that mark. That's how he operated. That's how he did that for years. Never did learn how to read or write.
Yeah, you talk about radio drills, I remember when I was up in engineering, they came out with a big corporate program called the JDV 11 program for how you could scientifically determine feeds and speeds. Of course, everything was, running faster, you might say. And it just wasn't working very good, because out in the shop, the operator just couldn't make it work, or didn't want to make it work. Let's put it that way.
He didn't have time to get it.
But so all of a sudden, it kept getting passed down from degree engineer to degree engineer, and finally Dwayne got the project. Because nobody wanted anything to do with it because it was a failure, and corporate said, "Hey, this is our program, it's supposed to work." And so you make it work. So I went out and I went to the tool crib, where you get sharp tools. And I don't know if Oliver, I don't remember if you got sharp drills from the tool crib or not.
I spent a lot of time there.
But I mean, if you're an operator, you know exactly what's got to be done to that drill to make it work. So the chips break up, and so it drills a straight hole, drills to size, and all that sort of stuff. So I went through and I just randomly picked 20 drills, and I just went to this box and got, say, a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch and maybe a 1 inch drill, and looked at them, and boy, to my surprise, they send dull drills to a tool grinding shop. And of course, the tool grinders, they would maybe take off, a 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch, or whatever they thought was okay. Well, I looked at them 20 drills, and since I'd been a machinist myself, I had a pretty good idea what should work, what shouldn't. Out of 20, there was probably 15 of them that I wouldn't put in a machine. And now these are the ones that you trade your dull one in for a sharp one, you're supposed to be able to go to the machine and put it in. So I went to my boss and I says, hey boss, you pick 20 drills just randomly, and then you tell me if you think. Now, he was a degreed engineer, you know, he didn't really, he kind of knew, but he didn't really know, you know. He picked 20, and man, he said there's 10 here that I wouldn't put in. Well, there were a few more I wouldn't put in a machine, but, so we finally determined that we had a tool grinding problem along with a feed and speeds problem. And for different materials, you have to sharpen the drill a little bit differently. A standard grind doesn't work on everything. And that was a big, what's that?
If you're cutting steel or cutting.
Yeah, cast or whatever, you know, it takes a
Put a
different.
certain grind on so they
Yeah,
chip, otherwise you come out and they wrap.
Yeah, you don't want the shavings, the long shavings.
That's good.
Well, the guy on the machine, he knew. Well, then we looked at the fixtures that hold these big parts where you're drilling holes in. And man, you know, if you could take your hand and rock the fixture back and forth, you know, it's no wonder you can't hold this plus or minus 2,000 pounds. And so then we had a big problem with, hey, you know, this machine, like you said, it's a World War II or older. These old radio drills, they were old, well, the fixtures were just as old.
Yeah.
Probably never been repaired, other than whatever a machinist did to make it work. And so then we had a big program on let's get everything fixed. Well, then that delayed production. And you know what happens when you delay production? You're in trouble. Because people want to get product out the door. And but there was a time when there was a big, you know, why don't we fix things? Production supervisors were under a lot of pressure. They were supposed to get product out, only quality product out. Well, quality is somewhat subjective at times. It depends on what production wants and what marketing wants.
Well, the problem I had was with the old foundry, the castings would vary a lot.
Yeah.
Just harder than heck, and then some would be like butter soft.
Yeah.
I'd get a load of soft ones and I'd set my speeds, you know, and everything, and then I'd get a load of hard ones.
Yeah.
Burn everything.
Breaking
You
drills.
needed a different grind on the drill.
Breaking $150 reamers, you know, all that stuff, that didn't go over too good.
And then one of the other things in the late 70s and early 80s where we're going from written records to computerized records. I don't know if any of you remember that sort of things or not, but, and then there was an automatic ordering system that, you know, if it didn't show you had this tool in the computer system, it automatically ordered a new one. Well, then the people in the tool cribs are saying, hey, you know, we don't have places to store all this stuff. Because we were ordering way too much stuff. And sometimes intentionally, sometimes it was automatically, but it wasn't necessarily the manufacturing engineer's problem. It just was the way the system was set up. And I had one product when I went out and physically counted inventory, because you had to prove to managers that what you said was really right. I learned a new word. You ever heard the word quantify? Means put numbers on things. I was a dumb farm boy and a dumb machinist and setup man, and one day I wrote a memo saying, you know, I want you to tell me what's wrong, what you've checked on a machine before I have to come out and try to fix it myself from engineering, because the manufacturing supervisor would call up and say, hey, you know, this new part you've got on my machine, number 2, it won't run at your feeds and speeds, you know, come out and fix it. And so I'd say, well, you know, I just asked him on the phone, basically, did you check this, this, and this? Well, we were responsible, talk about responsibility for going out and getting things fixed. But then we wanted to fix things that needed to be fixed, and manufacturing did certain things and engineering did certain things. Well, manufacturing have to make sure that bolts are tight, tools are set on the center line, and that the right equipment is in the machine, and it's sharp. You know, it's properly sharp, let's put it that way. And too many times we go out there and things would be loose, nuts and bolts would be loose, just loose enough that it wouldn't run. And so one day I put out this memo saying, you know, I want you to check these things before I come out. And the general supervisor from production came up to me one day and says, "What are you doing? My supervisors are complaining about this because now they've got to go check things before they call you." Well, why not? You know? And he says, "Oh, you want to quantify things." Well, he was smiling and shaking his head, yes, so guess what I did? I smiled back and shook my head, yes. That was dumb, I didn't know what quantify meant. So when I got back to my desk, I had to get my dictionary up, see what quantify meant, but he was right.
And we had a problem in engineering up here, Oliver. We had a team of 2 or 3 people, they called them the value engineering team.
Oh, yeah.
And so their job was to figure out ways to save money. Well, anyway, some vendor come in there one day, and we had all linkage in with 90-degree bends. We always had a washer and a cutter.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, he had these push nuts. He was pushing them, he was trying to sell us these push nuts. So I don't know if they tested them or not, but chief engineer went along with it. Yep, okay, we'll switch to these push nuts. Well, we changed all our drawings and took the holes out of the rods and
saving all that money.
And the first thing that happened, these push nuts are falling off. And so we had a massive project to get all that going again. And I mean, and then they had another one. They were gonna do away with all the lock washers. Because they'd get enough torque on these cap screws to pull them. Well, it worked good unless you had a gasket in there. If you had a gasket in there, the gasket retracts a little bit. So the bolts were coming loose. So then we had to go through the whole thing again. It was really a mess.
Yeah, you know, another thing I did, you talk about problems, I was a quality engineer. I did a lot of quality audits. You know, so one of the things that I go out to an area and I say, you know, tell me what you do, show me how you do it. And then I'd ask, well, why do you think it's the right thing to do? And the last thing I would ask when I leave a place, and this is like a John Deere engine works, is if you could change something, what would you change? Well, you know, your salary and their production, and are they gonna tell you a lot of things, or aren't they gonna tell you a lot of things? Well, they learned they could kind of trust me, I guess. And this guy said, look at this, and he held up a dipstick, you know what an oil dipstick is. Well, John Deere came out with a new engine. Well, this new engine required a dipstick that was about 2 inches longer. And guess what? You know, there's a lead time when you order new dipsticks. It takes X number of weeks to get them. They couldn't get any. So what do you think they did? They glued an extra 2 inches of metal down to the bottom of the dipstick. Well, I think they called it bonded it on. But here, you know, the guy that assembled these on the assembly line, he says, here, look at this. And he grabbed the dipstick. He says, see this? Now see this little extension on the end? He said, watch this. He tapped it on a steel bench. Right off. Well, when it breaks off, it goes down to the bottom of the engine or somewhere, and a lot of times it'll do bad things. So he said, I'd change that. He said, I wouldn't put any more of these hybrid dipsticks in an engine. So then after you get done with a quality audit, you report to the management team what you found. I said, you know, I really wasn't looking for this, but this came up at one of the assembly stations. This guy said he wouldn't use these dipsticks because the end breaks off. And of course I had one there, and I tapped it on the table. It took two taps, I think, to break the end off. And the plant manager was sitting there. Now, he was just a little short guy. You can't believe what kind of language a little short guy.
Oh, we had a couple of those in Oliver that way.
Oh, yeah.
And
they break your
he
horse
used
down,
some pretty
so-
graphic language. You want to know who in the hell had approved that? Well, now here's some purchasing manager sitting there. And they're all trying to crawl out the door. And somebody approved it because, you know, in production, they need to get the engines out. Well, they put a dipstick in, you know, if it's bonded down, the end of the dipstick should stay. It didn't always stay, it did probably half the time, but half the time it did. It caused quite a problem, but, boy, did he say something, I wanna talk to you and you after this meeting, you know. But boy, am I glad I wasn't the one that he was talking to, cause he was hot. And he should have been hot as plant manager. Usually plant managers don't come to a quality audit meeting, but this one did. And he was also a guy, I audited him one time, and he asked, he says, if I could do something different, he said, to be the auditor, he said, what is it I should do? You know, here's a plant manager asking me, and I'm thinking, what do I want to say here? You don't want to tattletale on people, but you want to say, you know, you go out in the shop, you might ask certain people these types of questions, and listen carefully to what they tell you. Because, you know, they're probably honest people. A lot of times the machinists and the operators, it's, you know, salaried versus union, and there's a little bit of tension. But a lot of times if he's honest, you know, and he was known as a pretty fair guy, they'll open up. But as an auditor, you know, one of the things, a quality auditor, you're supposed to be independent. You can't be in charge of whatever you're auditing or looking at. Well, the problem with that is, if you're looking at it, how do you know if it's the right thing to do or not? And one time, this gal that was an auditor, and I was just along as an observer trainer. And here's this guy, she said, show me how you do it. So this guy was showing on it, you know what a surface finish is, you know, is it smooth or coarse or something like that. There's this guy, he was really proud because he had a check on we call it a profilometer. It's a machine that measures how smooth the surface is of some metal. And he was showing her how he did it. She said, boy, that's really good. You really know your job here. Well, what he was doing, you have to set the thing to make sure it's right to start with, calibrated it's called. And he was using a test part that wasn't the right test part to calibrate it. So, you know, the magic number was 125. I'll say the number was 125, which is a fairly smooth surface. Not the smoothest, but it's smooth. And he had to hold a 125 finish, and I could look at some of the parts and just rub my, as a machinist, rub my thumbnail across them and come up with about the same thing that a machine could come up with. And I knew it wasn't good. And he wasn't doing it right. Well, she was gonna give him an attaboy for doing it right when he wasn't doing it right. And so that was a problem with, we never really did figure out how to fix that. With people who are independent of the operation they're auditing, because they really don't know the difference between right and wrong, they just know what the answer should be. And the machinist, we went to a lot of statistics for keeping track of are you making good parts and old parts or bad parts. Well, sometimes you'd have a gauge to measure like a +3 or -3 or something like that. Well, to a machinist, if the tolerance is plus or minus 3, they're concerned with is the part falls within that plus or minus 3 rate. They don't care if it's a -2 or +2, because it's still a good part. So they just, you know, with statistics, the numbers are pretty important, because people make a lot of decisions based on what the numbers come out to be, and after all the formulas are calculated. And so they were saying this process is completely in control. Well, here I'm coming by and I'm watching the guy check these parts. One's a -2, one's a +2. Well, he's writing down 0. He has to keep track of what some of these numbers are. Well, he's writing down 0 because to him it's a good part. That's all he's concerned with, it's a good part. Well, statistically a 0 or a +2 or -2, enough of them makes quite a difference in what the end results are. Is the process really in control or not? And at the end, they wonder how come they get bad parts off this machine when the numbers will show that the process should be completely in control. And so then here comes Wayne, goes out there and says, well, you know, did you realize this, this, and this? And then I'm the bad guy because now all of a sudden they gotta tell the truth, so to speak. And telling the truth is kind of a tough thing to do sometimes. Sometimes just telling it is what happens rather than telling the truth. And we've all been in that situation, which is better to do, just tell it, or really tell the truth. And I was known as the guy that probably told the truth, other than the one time when I screwed up and made a mistake. If I can laugh about it now, boy, I sure didn't laugh about it for a while.
One problem we had, you know, a lot of our parts were stored outside.
Yeah,
So in wintertime, you know, it
yeah.
gets 20 below. Well, they bring a load of parts in and they usually check a couple of them before they send them to the
Yeah.
line. Well, they brought a load of shafts in one time.
Uh-huh.
And I think old Franklin Troutner checked them.
Yeah.
And they were out of spec. Like, I don't know how many thousands they were. And so I asked him, I said, did you just bring those in or have they been in here for a while? No, he said, we just brought them in.
Let them sit.
Let them sit overnight, get up to room temperature. They were okay.
Yeah, we had that problem too one time with, we went to CNC machining, you know, they machine them, they'd be on size when the part was worn. They'd check them again the next day, they'd be out, the difference in temperature. So they had to, the engineers had to learn anew, what do you do as far as what temperature are parts when you check them? That was kind of a new thing, cause we really never really considered that until the CNCs really is what brought that on.
That should have been on the print then.
What's that?
That should have been on the print.
Well,
blueprint.
later it was,
Yeah.
but to start with, it wasn't. And, nobody could figure out, hey, how come we got all these parts that all of a sudden out of specs?
Yeah.
McKinney, you got any other questions or problems?
Well, I had quite a few questions written down, but, you know, everyone was just talking, so that's good too. But, you know, it's after 11, so if anyone wants to go, please feel free to,
Questions?
but